Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns, the film show where we do all that usual film discussion and review stuff, then pitch our own ideas for the sequel. In last week's episode we covered the original 1968 Planet of the Apes movie and its 4 sequels. If you haven't heard that one yet, go and listen to it right now for some context, then come back to this episode for our thoughts on this new series that follows Caesar, comprised of Rise of, Dawn of, and War for the Planet of the Apes. We also look at Tim Burton's Remake a little bit at the start, but we looked at that back when we did our Tim Burton episode, so we don't dwell on it too long. That's another one you might want to go back and listen to if you fancy it. While we're on the topic, you can go to our website at dimreturns.com, where there's a handy episode guide that'll help you find past episodes like that. Anyway, on with the show. FYI, this one was recorded before War for the Planet of the Apes had actually come out, so it's speculative in nature and contains no spoilers for the film whatsoever. It does, however, contain massive spoilers for Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Enjoy! It's a madhouse! Here at Diminishing Returns this week. Am I right, guys?
That was last week's.
No, it's both.
Oh, this one gets the old madhouse treatment as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, Draco.
And more.
Yeah. So, yes, welcome to Diminishing Returns. We're finishing what we started with Planet of the Apes last week, going back to the franchise for the various reboots and continuations of the original franchise that we discussed last week. So here we are. I am Sol, and with me as always are Calvin.
Hello. That was sort of a halfway impression. Let me do that again.
Calvin and Alan.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, sorry. That was my second hello. Hello. There you go.
Hello.
Hello.
Do you think by our 500th episode we'll have doing intros down to a science?
So yes, let's pick right up where we left off last week, because last week we talked about the 5 main films, and then there was also a TV show and an animated series, and then the franchise sort of died down for quite some time, didn't it? Good few decades.
As far as I understand, it was one of those things that was knocking around development hell for the whole 90s.
But there was going to be a sort of sequel at one point, and Roddy McDowall was going to be in it. Not necessarily the same character,
really?
but it was going to be called Return to the Planet of the Apes. And oddly enough, Danny Elfman was going to compose the film's score even before Tim Burton was connected. And Tom Cruise was meant to be in it, then Arnold Schwarzenegger, Charlie Sheen at one point.
That's what Arnie does. He gets attached to big projects that take 30 years to happen. James Cameron's often involved as well.
Oh, well, James Cameron was involved in this.
Oh, was he?
Yes. He was one of the directors who it looked like it might actually have worked with him, because Oliver Stone was being thought of at one point, and Chris
Oliver
Columbus.
Stone?
Yeah, I know. Weird,
Has
isn't
Oliver
it?
Stone ever made a, commercial
Yeah.
blockbuster film?
He tried to make Alexander.
What do you class as blockbuster, I suppose?
Has he ever made something that isn't a political thriller?
You're saying that his Apes wouldn't have been a political thriller? I mean, it could well have been.
Yeah. Do you reckon he took his development work on the Ape sequel and turned it into W, the George Bush biopic?
Nixon, surely. That would have been more timing-wise apt.
Look at Bush, and then look at a chimp.
No, you're right.
Presidents are often very simian, though, aren't they? Don't you think Abe Lincoln looks a bit like a bonobo?
Well, that's the end of the film. You've spoiled it.
Who else was developing it then? Tell me more.
God, at one point, Michael Bay,
What? Well, okay. God,
Roland Emmerich.
That would have been... I mean...
They were going for blockbuster, action sort of directors at one point.
I can imagine what they would have done.
Yeah. And then at some point, it just... I don't know how Tim Burton quite got involved, but Yeah, I guess this is like the turning point for him as a director, and I don't want to go too much into it because we already did a whole other episode on Tim Burton, but
we did. It's still available. Go and listen to our Tim Burton episode, and we discussed Planet of the Apes and Burton's career and everything.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this is kind of the turning point where he completely moves away from original or, let's say, interesting concepts, and then mainly does like sequels and reboots and adaptations and remakes and that sort of thing. But interestingly, he did say that like when he was coming into making this film, he was sort of like, he didn't want to make a sequel or a remake. He wanted to revisit the idea and, you know, give it his own spin and that sort of thing. His involvement is probably less interesting than the producer, Richard D. Zanuck, who we talked about last week, because he is like Tim Burton's regular movie producer, or was until he died a few years ago. So he was producing all of Tim Burton's movies. Right. He was the studio executive who greenlit Planet of the Apes back in the 1960s. Oh, and his wife at the time was Nova, the human lady from the first two Planet of the Apes films.
First of all, let's talk about the apes, how they are realised. Especially in comparison to the earlier films. Obviously, technology has moved on. Makeup has improved. We've got a bit of CGI involved.
But not on the characters themselves. Well, you know, the talking scenes. I mean, all of that is makeup. And then CG is used to remove like wires and stuff when they're hopping around. And there's obviously CG at play in the backgrounds. But the actors are in like actual real makeup, which is, I think, astonishing. Like how much they can emote and give a performance through all that.
Yeah, and just the actual makeup job itself is just fantastic. It's really well put together, and it looks like flesh and hair and real things, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, you know, we praised the makeup for its time from the original film last week, but like this, like would hold up today. Like it's astonishingly good makeup. I mean, you could make the case that it's actually more effective than like motion capture when we get there, but you know, we'll see.
Definitely, and then the movement of the apes. Is much more ape-like, which I really liked. That was one big improvement for me. They jump around in the trees and they walk in a ape-like way, and even though they're bipedal, but as opposed to the earlier films, which were a bloke in a hairy suit.
Yeah. That's something we never really touched on in those films. Actually, is that they don't really play it like apes at all. I feel like there's got to be a conscious decision on their part. Like, they must have decided... There must have been a point when an actor said, right, so I'm going to be slouching, looking at my knuckles, and someone said, no, you're evolved. You're meant to be, like, evolved from apes, so you behave as men.
But it works a lot better like this, because they've got the advantage of they can run around in the trees and all that. That makes sense. And but also, you know, in the earlier films, that's okay in the first one, but by the fourth film, where we're supposed to be in 1970s, and it's like they're just becoming a revolution, they're supposed to be proper apes. So, what about the cast then? We got Tim Roth.
We got Helena Bonham Carter meeting Tim Burton, and the start of their whirlwind romance.
Yeah, we saw her in that little chimp face and thought,
well, that's it. Do you think that's it? Do you think he? Do you think he kept some of that ape makeup for after the film was done?
Doesn't bear thinking about. I think it just say a lot about Tim Burton, though, that Mark Wahlberg, there's a little bit of a love triangle going on. It's not especially developed, but there is this other human woman played by Estella Warren, who I've never heard of before. Paul Giamatti.
Yeah. See, Paul Giamatti's perfect in that role.
Yeah, he's brilliant. I love him. He's my favourite thing in the film.
And Tim Roth, as we were talking about him, I really like Tim Roth in this. It's one of my favourite Roth
really
performances. I think Tim Roth falls into that category sometimes of being a bit just boring Tim Rothy, kind of just the same. And he's quite a good actor. I don't see him do it that much. But in this, he's like, I guess he's got the mask on, so it just gives him a lot more freedom. The physicality's all there, the way he uses his hands and things. I mean, the character's really weirdly unnecessarily aggressive, which I guess is just the chimpanzee in him. But it kind of, I don't like the character. I know you're not supposed to, but it doesn't feel very real or relatable in any way. Like, you can understand where he's coming from. He just seems like an over-aggressive wanker. Who else is in it? Oh, I bet I know someone you will like in it, Calvin. What's his name? Glenn Shaddix as the big fat orangutan.
Oh my god, you knew! Yeah. Tim Burton regular, Glenn Shaddix.
I knew you'd like him.
There is Michael Clarke Duncan, who's another star.
Oh yeah,
of the
another
film.
great bit of casting. That just to get a huge big bastard to play a gorilla. It makes sense. Doesn't it?
With that deep voice as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Really, really good. I think all the apes are very much well cast. It's the humans that are the problem.
So
what went wrong?
Story. Well, first of all, right, you got this little bit of setup at the beginning, which explains how Marky Mark gets sent into space, and he's working with these chimps as this experimental astronaut thing. Well, first of all, it annoys me. He keeps referring to them as monkeys, right? Which just annoys me. Yes. It's like one thing for general people doing it, but someone who works with apes on a daily basis wouldn't do that, I don't think. Yeah. You could literally have it starting with him in a spaceship going, "Oh no, it's going out of control. I don't know what's happening." And he go, "Oh, we've lost contact. Hello." And then that's it. And then he lands on something. We don't need to know why he's there or how he's got there. It's just a space thing that's gone wrong, isn't it?
It's just really stupid. I mean, why is this space station using apes to send? I mean, I know that's obviously, part of space exploration from the early days in the 50s when they'd send animals up there and whatever. But surely in the future they'd have drones that they can just send in, or cameras, because they basically just find it's like a wormhole or something that they send this chimp into, and then Wahlberg goes off after it.
And in the early days of the space race as well, the reason they sent animals up there was to see if they would die. Because if they sent a human up there and they died, it'd be bad publicity. So they wanted to see how much radiation would they take on. Would they instantly, would zero gravity just make your brain melt or something? It's what we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, it wasn't a good film, was it?
No.
I mean, and the good things about it were the makeup and the sort of physicality of it that haven't got that much to do with the director, really. Yeah, so for the film, it kind of misses this whole part where Mark Wahlberg lands on a planet, and then we miss the bit where he goes, "What the fuck? This is a planet of apes, and they've got this whole civilization." Like this, the first film, that's half the film with Charlton Heston trying to come to terms with what's going on, and then talking with the other the other apes and stuff. With this one, it's just like, holy shit, I'm on a planet full of apes. Right, what's my plan to get off? Hey guys, can you help me? I'm going to run over there and blow that up, and you can do this. It's like there's no moment of kind of contemplation about it all.
Because Alan, he's from the future, and he's seen Charlton Heston's Planet of the Apes movies, so it's not a weird idea to him.
And he's just like, I know what's going on here. This is Earth all along.
Yeah, I love it in those early scenes, they're rounding up all the humans and they put Mark Wahlberg in a cage, and it's like, watch out for that one, he's feisty. It's like he's not done anything. He has not done anything to display feistiness.
He's got a Boston accent. So that ending then, the new twist.
Yes, Marky Mark gets in the ship that his chimp came back in and flies off. Apparently not caring anymore for the people, the friendships, the relationships he's made over the course of this adventure. It's like, nope, first opportunity I can, I'm leaving.
Yeah, and leaves the chimp there, because it makes a unanimous decision. I'm more important than the chimp. I'm going back. He can stay here. Yeah, so he goes back. He lands in, a very prominent, well-known location, as you do. Because you don't aim for, grasslands or bit of waste forest land or water even.
No, he's right by that penis statue thing in Washington. And then he walks up to what we think is the Lincoln Memorial, but in fact it is the General Thade Memorial.
Yes.
And then a load of gorillas get out of 2001 looking police cars, and it's like, oh god, it's our world, but it's all apes.
So, let's explain that ending. Any ideas?
Okay, the only thing I can possibly think of is General Thade is apprehended at the end of the film in the other time zone. maybe he must have escaped and got back to Mark Wahlberg's crashed ship and fixed it somehow, and then travelled back in time to further than what Mark Wahlberg did. And maybe he was just like, maybe he just like took over Abraham Lincoln's, like, Saul made the point earlier that presidents look kind of simian, so maybe General Thade just went back and, like, took Abraham Lincoln's place and no one noticed. It was just like, oh, okay, it's him again. But he, like, had sex with someone, his wife, perhaps, who had a kid, and then they just started having sex with humans, and eventually they just all became apes. But nonetheless, General Thade was still shot while at the theatre, in the back of the head.
Alan, remember how Kevin Smith fell out with Tim Burton over this?
Yeah. Yes.
Over Planet of the Apes?
Well, he wrote a comic book story about Jay and Silent Bob, in which they do some sort of Planet of the Apes pastiche, and at the end, they end up on a world, like human world, but it's all apes. And one of the things they do is they go to the Lincoln Memorial, and it's like a chimp head on the Lincoln Memorial, and he goes, "Oh my God, what have you done?" kind of thing. Which obviously in this comic book we're taking the piss because it's Jay and Silent Bob. But yeah, it was essentially the same ending as Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes.
Wow. And what did Kevin Smith get? Did he sue Tim Burton or something?
He made a public statement or press release which he claims was a joke, and I believe was just a like he was just messing around, but people took seriously where he said, "Hey, what's going on? Tim Burton's ripped off my film. He's ripping off the comic book." Then Tim Burton released the statement. He said, "I have not seen the image, and anybody that knows me knows I do not read comic books, and I especially wouldn't read anything that was created by Kevin Smith."
Ooh. Well, they had a bit of history. They had a bit of personal beef about the Superman script and all that sort of history. So
Kevin Smith always says, and that explains Batman. His line about not reading comic books.
Brilliant.
You know in the film, it's been a while since I saw it. Next to the Lincoln statue, that's not General what's his name, is it? As Lincoln, is
General Thade? Yeah. It says on the sign behind him, "This is dedicated to the great General Thade." Something. Yeah, so it is
Thade
supposed
we trust or something.
Because if it was just a chimp, then you go, okay, this is a chimp civilization.
Yeah,
that's
it should have
similar.
just been a sign that said Abraham Lincoln.
Oh my God! Shall we think of more president names with ape puns in them?
Yeah.
I can't think of any.
I can't think of a single. Right. Hang on. I'm trying to think of a president I can put Mandrill into.
Mandrill.
But I can't think of like a famous enough president. James Madison, James Mandrillson, but like you need like a president people know. Chester Ape Arthur.
Anyway, let's leave it.
Warren G. Harding, but the G stands for Gibbon.
Oh my God.
Oh dear. Anyway, the film was something of a financial success, if not a critical failure. And it took us 10 years to get a reboot, a full-on proper reboot of the series with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which has a bit of an interesting history, as the script was actually not intended to be a Planet of the Apes film. When you hear the producers talking about it, they were just inspired by a lot of... there was a lot of reports about like that poor lady that got her face ripped off by a chimpanzee and all these chimpanzee violent acts and things. So they were just writing a film about intelligent chimpanzees, and at some point during the writing they were just like, oh, we're just making Planet of the Apes, aren't we?
Well, Planet of the Apes 4 is, isn't it? It's
yes.
the one where you see the apes coming.
This is it, and then they were like, oh, okay, then should we go to 20th Century Fox and see if they're interested? Yeah, right then. And then they were like, oh yeah, we're interested in this. Let's go for it. So it was supposed to be titled Caesar initially, and then it became Caesar Rise of the Apes, and then it became Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
At the time, people were sort of like, so what, is it in the continuity of Tim Burton's film? Is it another sequel for the original? Is it a new thing altogether? And then it came out, and I suppose it wasn't. It was still quite confusing for the average moviegoer, I suppose.
Well, it's his own thing, isn't it? It's not connected to the others in a timeline sense. It's just a remake.
Well, you can watch it as a prequel to the original film with no real issues, but you have to disregard the sequels to the original film.
Yeah.
Which is what I do because I don't really like those sequels. So
was it sold on the fact that, hey, we can do motion capture now, so it's like a whole new thing? The new technology defends it as a remake, doesn't it? It's kind of like, why should we remake this film again? Well, here's why. We can do it differently. In 2009 or whatever, when they were sort of pitching it, you say, look, here's why. Look at this look at this gorilla was played by Andy Serkis. Look what you can do these days. And I think you sell it on that basis.
Well, bear in mind as well, this wasn't exactly a huge budget thing. It was made for less than $100 million, and it's a relatively small sort of... It's not even a full-on action film, really. It's more of a thriller than anything else. Did either of you see any of the behind-the-scenes stuff of Andy Serkis and James Franco and the... Because I have a whole other appreciation of...
To what extent James Franco had Andy Serkis on his lap and stuff.
Oh, yes. Andy Serkis goes full, he's really, hopping around and, doing all the stuff. And James Franco is just... James Franco was quite vocal in saying that this was just a paid gig for him and he had no real interest in it at all, so...
After our discussion of him in Spider-Man and how he's not particularly big on his time in those films, it seems really odd that he did this film. It's really it's not his usual fare at all.
No. And this is one of the reasons why the film had quite a negative buzz about it when it was coming out, because and he was one of the reasons for it, because he was very vocal about, I just did this for the money, I think it's a load of nonsense really, I'm just not terribly interested.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of this film then, Rise of the Planet of the Apes? How do you feel about it?
I really, really, really like it. Yeah.
Alan?
Well, I won't go that far. I thought it was a good, solid film. I definitely had issues with it, but I think it does what it sets out to do pretty well.
I'm probably closer to Calvin then. I really love this film. I was really surprised by it when it came out because I wasn't expecting much. And I mean, the general consensus seems to be that with this reboot franchise, they get better with each film. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is generally regarded as being a superior sequel, and all reviews so far indicate that War of the Planet of the Apes is, I should add, it's not out at the time of recording, but all the reviews suggest it is the best one yet that I've seen. But for me, personally, I think this is much better than Dawn, certainly. I like Dawn, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but what I love here is the fact that this is a very intimate relationship drama, essentially, between this ape and his owner, and about this ape kind of finding himself, and it's against a suburban backdrop, and I find that far more interesting than the kind of more generic post-apocalyptic people fighting people that you get in the sequels.
Well, I did like elements of it, but I felt like the emotional bit with him and James Franco didn't quite sort of play out enough for me, because it kind of ended with him running along a bridge and then sort of didn't, I don't know, it just didn't quite come together for me.
I mean, you
bit
before, get a sense that Franco doesn't want to be there watching the film. But I feel like Andy Serkis' performance and, whatever the many animators did to bring it to life, Caesar's performance in this film is remarkable. And the CGI in this film, it holds up really well. I mean, you can always kind of tell that it's...
There's a couple of moments where it's like, well, that was it.
But it's really good stuff. And I think a big part of that is that all of the chimps from the start are CGI, just to kind of get you used to the idea that chimps look weird and otherworldly in this film. You never see a real chimp in the film, and I think that was a really smart decision on that of the filmmakers. It's normally something I wouldn't like and I'd call gratuitous and lazy, but it really is the right decision in this film just to set the tone.
I will say that I think the film's got a really great pace, and the opening few scenes are really come on, let's get into it.
I really noticed that on the rewatch, just how, if anything, it almost felt too fast for me, which is something I'd almost never say. it felt so quick and just like punchy. But I like that, because I like it when a film really doesn't give you an opportunity to get bored with it. Just constantly keeps moving along. And
Yeah. And then it's just really in these opening scenes that we're introduced to the human characters. We have James Franco.
And John Lithgow.
Who I love his scenes. He plays James Franco's Alzheimer's-ridden father. By the way, have either of you seen Deep Blue Sea?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly the same thing, isn't it? Like scientists experimenting on animals to cure Alzheimer's because of a family member with. Anyway, it just. But James Franco is very much he is the villain. Like, everything that goes wrong is because of him. All of his experiments wipe out humanity, and...
True, but he's not painted as the villain, is he?
No, certainly not. Instead, he has this boss, British boss, who, like, literally every single line he has mentions or references money. It's like you could change every single line of dialogue he has to money, 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 and you'd have the exact same character. There's no...
And then at the end, you're almost meant to be like enjoying this villain's downfall when the apes
He's
kick him off.
He's a bit too likable, isn't he? Like the actor is.
But it's like, what's he done? He's not done anything particularly wrong or evil. Yeah.
If they'd have listened to him at the start, the whole thing would have been shut down, and that day would have been saved. Really.
Maybe he's run a somewhat negligent facility, but I don't know if that warrants death. You know.
But that's it. Like, the thing is, he shuts the program down and we hate him. And then later on, he insists they push forward further and we have to hate him for that. And then when everything goes wrong, he's like, shit, we have to kill these fucking chimps. And then we have to hate him for that as well. It's like, just do everything wrong.
It's a very eccentric cast, I want to say. Like, it's mainly character actors, like Brian Cox and Tom Felton appear later on as some shelter owners, and Frida Pinto's in it, bizarrely. I guess that her Slumdog Millionaire glow was still going around this time, but she doesn't really do anything as a character.
She's good, but the character doesn't go anywhere. And to be honest, after the point where the Caesar gets put into the prison thing, James Franco could fuck off as far as I'm concerned, and the girl, because they don't add anything after that.
Well, he basically does.
From the moment, you get the moment where Caesar sort of officially kind of rejects him because he's accepted his new life as the daddy of the prison, and then we switch to a completely different film, which was actually the bit I liked was the prison movie, like Caesar in prison. That whole section, I loved that bit. And then after they escaped, again, I was kind of a bit not interested. But that prison bit that should have been the film for me. That was what I really, really dug about this whole thing.
See, I love the prison bit and the stuff at the start where it's like about a guy looking after an ape. And I'll admit that I do kind of switch off a bit at the end when it just becomes a full-blown action extravaganza. But even then,
I like it all.
I was going to say, even then, it's a very well-made action extravaganza. I do enjoy it. It's just kind of, it's not quite as tightly paced for me at the end. It's not quite as good.
And there are some very cheesy moments, like when Caesar and the orangutan and a gorilla are like on the top of a San Francisco trolley, like going over the hill. They're just like stood there posing and looking like over at the Golden Gate Bridge.
Posing for the poster.
Yes. It really is just, and the music's building, and it's like, I kind of love it though. It is cheesy, but I like it.
What about the horrendous references to the original film?
Oh, it's really, it's really bad. I can only assume that these references were in there before they decided to call it Rise of the Planet of the Apes, because they just wanted to make it absolutely perfectly clear that this is a Planet of the Apes film, even though that might not have been in the title. Malfoy gets it's a madhouse, and a get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape.
There's basically no justification for that. That's the problem with this film, and this is true of most of these big blockbusters when they crowbar in a famous line of dialogue, is that there's barely any real justification. You don't believe that character would say that line at that point. It just feels very artificial. And the idea that he just turns around and goes, "It's a madhouse."
I could kind of go with that to an extent, because the chimps are all going mad and he's like, "Yeah, it's a madhouse." if I could give you that one, but when you go to the lengths of take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape, it's just too much. It's too long. It's too so distinctive of that film. It's
I don't think this ever made it through to a cut, but at the end when the James Franco's boss is like teetering on the edge in that busted up helicopter, and he's on the edge of the bridge, and it's like in the theatrical cut, Caesar like walks away, and Koba, who is a nasty bonobo, comes in and does the deed and kicks the helicopter off there. Caesar does it in the other version, but I think, from what I understand, the studio were very uneasy about, we want the audience to really like this guy because sequels are going to depend on them liking him.
Well, that ties into a note I've made, really, which is it's such an odd film to watch at the end because you really don't know not only who to root for, but who the film wants you to be rooting for. You just kind of feel like you're watching this downfall of society as a neutral observer, which is something you just don't get in films, really, ever. You're almost always rooting for the humans, or occasionally you're rooting for the things that aren't humans because they've kind of subverted expectations and what have you. And in this film, it's just very like, I don't know, am I rooting for this guy? Am I meant to be rooting for this guy or that guy? I don't know what the film wants me to do. It's odd.
Revolution is a sort of murky moral area, though, you see.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying, I like the fact that the film feels so kind of weird in that respect.
I do want to ask you one thing, Sol, as someone who saw this film in the cinema, just while we were talking about the ending. There are two key moments of the film when Caesar talks. So, Malfoy's giving him shit, and Caesar barks back, "No!" And there's a very deliberate, like, long, dramatic pause and absolute silence. And I'm just curious, did people, giggle a little bit in the cinema when that happened? Or were they with it? Because I was, like, watching it myself, I was sort of like, I found myself smirking because it is such a hammy moment. But at the same time, the film is so good that I go with it. I don't, dislike it. But I could imagine people giggling.
I don't remember anyone giggling or anything. I remember when that moment happened, and I might be misremembering, but my memory is that happened and I got goosebumps because it like not because I love the moment or anything, but because it just threw me. Like, it caught me so off guard.
Yeah, you aren't really expecting it.
Yeah, and I remember just being like, I really didn't like it as well, I should add. When I first watched it, I was like, wait, come on, what the fuck? But it really did throw me. So, I mean, it's possible there were giggles and I was just so into the film and, like, not, in my own world that I didn't even notice. But I think most people were just very thrown like I was. And I spoke to people around then who were fine with it and went with it. And I remember really not liking him speaking later on in the film as well when he spoke again. And I don't really know why. Rewatching it doesn't bother me nearly as much. At the time when I was watching it, it just seemed a bit too far. The
first time he speaks, I was thinking this when I was watching it again. The first time he speaks is just after he's gassed all the other chimps and made them sort of super chimps, or all the other apes, in fact. And so they've all sort of so he's just got a double dose of this gas. So maybe it's sort of pushed him a little bit further. And because he's learned to speak, he's been learning to speak all his life with humans, but he's just never been able to form it. And I can go with it to a certain extent.
Shall we talk about Dawn of the Planet of the Apes then, which almost doubled the budget of the previous one. True post-apocalyptic world now. Most humans have been wiped out, and the Caesar is living with his intelligent apes who can all sign and some can talk.
I don't quite remember, but my understanding is the director of Rise of the Planet of the Apes was going to return initially, and partway through pre-production, he left from, creative differences and what have you, and they brought in Matt Reeves to direct the film.
I'm just reading now, apparently there were concerns with the release date, and Rupert Wyatt is the director of the first film, and he was like, there's no way I can make that date, so they hired Matt Reeves instead, who is now...
Well, he seems to be Hollywood's go-to fixer for troubled productions now.
Yeah.
After Batman as well, but has been hired to do that for DC, after Ben Affleck walked from the director's chair.
Interesting.
I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but I'd certainly say we got a very, very good sequel.
Yeah.
Matt Reeves, he did a great job. It really does go off in a different direction. It's very different to the film that came beforehand, and it continues the kind of franchise tradition, I suppose, of just doing something completely different with each film.
Yeah.
Something that I can't quite see being true for the new film coming out. Everything I've seen from that would indicate it's just going to be more of what we had in this one, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. But yeah, I mean, it's just a very good film, if you ask me.
Yeah. No, it's
action.
Yeah, it's very good. But it goes beyond that. Like, there's deeper themes at play.
Yeah. Well, this is the point. Do you guys think they ever will catch up with the original Planet of the Apes film, or do you think they're smart enough to know better?
Yeah, I don't think they'll go there again.
I wouldn't be surprised if they end up doing something very similar, but it's kind of a new story with the same plot elements. But to be honest, I don't think they'll go there. I can't see them.
Yeah, I think they're on to a good thing with this whole... I think, yeah, even this is very much... it's like a remake of the second part of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. And we talked about in our previous episode about how elements of that film weren't developed quite enough for our liking, and here we have like 2 whole films about it, really.
And these are great examples of I mean, it's what people always say: you shouldn't remake the classics, you shouldn't remake good films, you should dig out the shit films that didn't quite get it right but had some nice ideas and remake those. And it sadly rarely works like that, but that kind of does seem to be kind of what we've got in this franchise at the minute. They're mining this mythology for the good ideas and just doing a really good job of bringing it to life in a way that I imagine was kind of how the original filmmakers saw it in their heads.
Well, I'm getting the impression that I didn't like this film as much as you guys.
Oh,
not surprised at all.
Not that I disliked it particularly, but it just went more into that kind of just action, which I'm not interested in. There's a big battle at the end, but there were definitely elements that I like, and generally it's sort of like on the good end of middle of the road kind of for me. So, like, well, for example, Gary Oldman, just completely wasted. Didn't really get enough of him in there. If you're gonna have Gary Oldman, get him do something.
I thought he was fine.
Yeah, I liked him in that part.
But I never liked the character either. It's just like the whole... It did frustrate me watching it, and that's not because it was bad filmmaking. It's because it was quite accurate, if anything. This kind of like people trying, and apes trying to kind of come together peacefully, but small elements kind of disrupting it, and misunderstandings creating like different things. And it gave me quite a negative, frustrated feeling, but that is not kind of the film's fault. In fact, it's the whole point of it.
Well, I really like that, because there are some scenes, there's like a scene where they're, the humans and the apes are sort of by the side of a lake, and they're sort of getting on, and then one of the humans is smuggled in a shotgun, which was not part of the agreement, and then there's a really tense moment where you think, this little truce could break down right now. Like, it's, you never quite know, the shit is going to hit the fan at some point, you just don't quite know when, and I like that a lot about it, because you do just kind of want them all to get on and get along with their lives, but they don't. I really like it. I think it's great. I think even the action sequences at the end are, like when Cobra is like on a horse with machine guns like leaping through flames. It's such a terrifying image. And then that whole shot when he's there's a tank and this ape like jumps on top of it and like bashes in the guy's head who's like shooting the gun. It's all one take, just like static, on the head of the tank, and it's just moving around, and at one point the ape gets in the tank and starts firing, and then he barges down the door of the human settlement. It's just such an amazing shot. I think it's really, really well done.
Well, that's probably a good jumping off point to pitch our own ideas for the sequel. Before we do that, I have prepared a little game for us to play. It's ape related. All right. Okay. So the game is, I'm going to tell you actors, famous actors and people. You have to tell me if they have made a movie about them and an ape hanging out, or if they haven't.
I think.
This is inspired by James Franco in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. It's sort of its own subgenre. There's a whole load of these films where a guy hangs out with an ape. And I want you to tell me if these people are ape or nay. Right.
Ape or not ape?
Ben Kingsley. Sir Ben Kingsley. Ape or nay?
Ape.
Alan?
I can't think of anything specific.
That's why I'm sure he did it.
So I'll say no. Nay.
That is a point for Calvin. Sir Ben Kingsley starred in a Brazilian film called The Fifth Monkey, which is a downright bizarre-sounding film about a guy who comes across 4 chimps and sees it as a sign from God because they're not native to Brazil, and tries to sell them, but then he can't figure out a way to get them from one place to another without kind of trying to lure them with fruit and stuff. It sounds really weird. Okay, next one. Gérard Depardieu.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, again, I don't know of anything specific, but it seems so obvious.
Is that ape or nay?
I'll go, I think I've got to go ape.
Correct to both of you, yeah. Gérard Depardieu starred in Bye Bye Monkey. It's about a man who finds a baby chimp inside a giant King Kong prop and decides to raise it as if it were his own son.
Okay.
Yes, you do.
Okay. Christian Slater.
I'm gonna say yes again. I feel like there's gonna be something.
Okay, I'll say no then. I'll go with a no. Nay.
This is a point for Alan this time. That is nay. Christian Slater has never made an ape movie, although he does seem like the type. Now, John Travolta.
Oh, he must have.
Yeah, that rings a bell. I'll say yes.
Him and a monkey as detective and sidekick or something.
Somewhat surprisingly, John Travolta has never made an ape movie. Although he has starred in Look Who's Talking, the series about a talking baby.
Yes.
Okay. Ronald Reagan.
Yes. Hail to the chimp.
I'm going to say no, actually.
Yes. Ape.
No.
Yes, Ronald Reagan starred in Bedtime for Bonzo.
Oh dear.
Which is about a psychology professor trying to teach human morals to a chimp in an attempt to solve the question of nature versus nurture. I assume it was before he became president. Okay, next up, Emily Deschanel. That's Zoe's sister.
Ooh.
I'll just say yes, because why else would you have picked her out?
Yeah, I'm going to go ape.
No, Emily Deschanel has not. She's not even a big enough star for that.
I didn't even know she existed, so...
Okay, Matthew Modine.
I'd say yes. I can't...
Yeah.
I don't know what it would be.
Was
but
he in Mighty Joe Young?
He might have been, but the film I've got here is 2004's Funky Monkey. A family film about a spy who has to team up with a chimp to save the day.
Great.
Okay. Matt LeBlanc.
Yeah, ape.
Yeah. Ape, yes. Ape.
A baseball playing ape. Yeah, I knew you were going to drop that one on us.
He starred in 1996's Ed, and yes, it is about a chimp that plays baseball. Have either of you seen that film?
No,
I've not seen the whole film, no.
It is absolutely atrocious. I thought, I watched it thinking, how bad can Joey and a chimp really be? The answer is surprisingly very, very good. Bill Murray.
I want to say no.
He's done one with an elephant, but not a chimp.
You're both correct. He's not done a chimp film. I was hoping that Larger Than Life, the film where he inherits an elephant, might throw it. Chevy Chase?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you'd think he must have at some point.
Surprisingly, no. Chevy Chase has never done that. Elizabeth Shue?
Oh, yes. Mighty Joe Young.
Is she in Mighty Joe Young?
Oh, I don't know. Who the fuck is in Mighty Joe Young? There's someone in Mighty Joe Young. But I'm still going to say yes.
I'll say no then.
Yes is the correct answer. She was in a film called Link, a 1986 British horror film about a super intelligent, malicious orangutan who lashes out when his Masters try to have him euthanized. Okay, Thora Birch.
No.
I know her in two things. No.
She starred in 1994's Monkey Trouble. Okay, Charlotte Rampling.
Yes. And she shags it.
I'm going to say no.
No, Alan is absolutely correct. She does shag a chimp in a film.
Oh.
Does she shag it, or does she just fall in love with it? I've never actually seen the film.
What film is
called
it?
Max Mia Moore. Cuba Gooding Jr.
Yes!
I'm afraid the answer is no.
Oh.
I've chosen well here, haven't I? It's a very good, false actors. Matthew Broderick.
Yes. It's probably one Inspector Gadget.
Yeah.
Yes, he has. He starred in 1987's Project X, which is about a US Air Force airman who's assigned to care for a chimp that's being used in an Air Force project. Calvin, you'll like this one. Charlize Theron.
Mighty Joe Young.
Oh, yes, it is!
Is that right?
Yes, Charlize Theron starred in the 1998 remake of Mighty Joe.
Yay! I knew I'd get it eventually.
All right, Alan wins the ape, so that means that Alan, you are king of the apes. You are Caesar.
Oh dear.
You're Cobra.
Okay, so right, moving on. Should we do some sequels?
Yeah, let's.
I had an idea that didn't go anywhere. It was a title.
Oh no, mine's only a title.
Planet of the Snapes.
Of the snakes.
Snapes.
Does Draco come back?
Yeah, as in Sirius or whatever his name is. Severus.
I can't believe you brought this up. You know that Tim Roth was supposed to play Snape in Harry Potter, but he couldn't because he was committed to Tim Burton's
I didn't know that.
Planet of the Apes. Oh, there
I just wanted a lot of actors playing computer-generated versions of Alan Rickman. And they have to fight for their rights to be Alan Rickman.
Well, of course, Jeremy Irons is the ultimate Alan Rickman.
Who would be the human on the planet of the Alan Rickmans?
Christoph Waltz.
Christoph Waltz. I can't wait to hear Christoph Waltz's version of "Get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty snakes."
Yeah, I basically got a title that I've adapted into a film, just like last week. So, in Gaul, Asterix is knocking around, and he sees his friend Obelix acting strangely, and the chief's niece has turned up. Panechia? I don't know if I'm saying that rightly. And Druid Getafix deducts that Obelix must fancy her, so Asterix suggests that he goes to pick some flowers to give to her, and he does that, and just as he's going to give her this lovely bouquet, she is reunited with Tragicomics, a handsome young man that had left and has returned, and the chief reveals that they'll be marrying each other soon, so Obelix is heartbroken. The two lovers go off into the woods, and then they're ambushed by a group of apes led by a fresh ape soldier looking to make a good impression on his centurion. Then when he brings the kidnapped humans back to camp, the centurion is furious and berates him and panics and orders to take the two captives to the farthest outpost in the empire, which is situated in the Sahara, before the Gauls realise what's happened, because basically the Gauls, they've got this magic potion and they beat up the apes all the time, so it's this one human stronghold where the apes just haven't been able to take over. Then the Gauls find out and they trash the ape camp and go looking for them, and they end up going on a rescue mission to the Sahara, but they get in trouble along the way, the two captives, on the way to the Sahara, and they are stranded in the desert before being captured by slave traders who find them and bring them to the big ape city where they're sold to be used as part of Caesar's grand show. Then when presented before Caesar, Tragicomics refuses to bow and speaks out against him, and Caesar decides that the two of them will be thrown to the lions instead. No, not lions, they're extinct. They're going to be thrown to the big angry gorilla instead, as part of the big gorilla show in the Colosseum. And then Asterix and Obelix, they're tracing them, and they find their way to the Ape City following their movements. They end up posing as gladiators for the big show. They make a right mess of it. They win the chariot race. They beat up all the prize gladiator apes. And Caesar unleashes the big gorilla on them, which is meant to be a death sentence. And obviously they beat it because they've got a magic potion. And they have this big action fight scene. And Caesar is so impressed with their might, he grants them their freedom. And they return to the village and have a feast. It's called Asterix versus Caesar.
Is this entire Asterix connection just based on the name Caesar as the leader of the Romans?
And on the French origin of the source material, I'm sure.
Oh, of course, yes.
No, I didn't put that much thought into it, Calvin.
Okay, good.
Shall I go with mine then? My pitch?
Go on then.
Yes.
Okay.
Calvin.
So I'm going to do a sequel TV series to Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes. So we pick up right from the end of the film, where Marky Mark is being held in a detention centre and being questioned by his ape captives. Let me get there. He eventually escapes, and there's a chase around Washington where he ends up in a museum, and he learns that history to this point, in 2001, has been exactly the same as it was on Earth when he was there, but with apes instead of humans.
Oh, so he finds the Frasier DVD box set and settles in to watch it. and it's Monkey Frasier.
Yeah, Kelsey Grammer's an orangutan. So anyway, he's like horrified by this, and this is all the first episode, by the way. He must get back to his own time and universe, so he regains access to his space pod thing and travels back through the wormhole from which he came, back to the Planet of the Apes, actually, so he can pick up Helena Bonham Carter, that human woman, the human child, and the foursome all band together to work to get Marky Mark back home. Paul Giamatti's character can stow away or something, or end up on the ship by accident, because we want him along for the journey as well. And what follows is really Lost in Space meets Star Trek. They'd go to several different planets, and each episode would be on a new planet, and they have adventures and stuff. So, for example, there is actually a Planet of the Elephants, where they help the elephants with their mice problem, or maybe help the mice with their elephant problem, who knows. There's a Planet of the Snakes. There's a Planet of the Fridge Freezers. It's basically whatever we want, and for guest star episodes, we can have Planet of the Tom Cruises or Planet of the Mackenzie Crooks, and so
depending on budget.
Yeah, we've got two ends of the spectrum there, and basically we never end conclusively, much like the original Planet of the Apes TV series, because we just want to keep on going forever until the show becomes unprofitable. Yes, well, there we go then.
Alan, let's see. Alan's going.
Oh, I thought Alan already had his, didn't he?
No.
Oh, what was Planet of the Snakes about?
That was just a throwaway title concept that I didn't do anything with.
Oh, okay then. I thought that was a great idea. I don't think anything's going to come as close to that in the history of the show.
Alan's real thing won't be as good.
I'm going to stop trying to. I'm just
that's apparently all you need to do.
My idea does go with no humans. I'm not interested in the humans. As last week, that's the boring element. Ape society, that's what I'm interested in. An analogy for ourselves. So my pitch takes place with the ape civilization.
It's like political running season, whatever they call it. And the hot topic is abortion. Is it right or wrong? And the apes are hotly debating abortion.
They want to build a wall between them and the humans.
Okay. And that's it though. It's about an ape congressman, and he has to come down either side on this divisive issue of abortion, and that's Alan's pitch.
Well, that's the sequel to my pitch, actually. What my pitch is. Okay, so we've got the apes. They go back. They're away from humans. They rebuild their society. They continue living in peace in this chimp-dominated society. And there's the rub. So, this chimp-dominated society, my film will focus on the civil rights movement of the gorillas as they try to improve their social standing in the ape civilization. So, this is a society, it's built around physical aggression and dominance, the alpha male. That's how they demonstrate leadership. as we've seen in the first film. The gorillas are bigger than the chimps, but they're generally more docile. They're really regarded as these big lummoxes. They're kind of the chimpanzees don't respect them. They're kind of the manual labourers.
Yeah, they're right, old chimpanzees.
Chimpanzee. And the orangutans, they're also separated from the chimps, but they're kind of a bit more respected. They're kind of more intellectual part of the society, so they're kind of happy with what they're doing. But so after years of being corralled into these manual labour jobs, one of the gorillas starts a union. And now the chimps, they sense something brewing. It's trouble on the horizon. They try and suppress the gorillas, but this only strengthens the resolve of the whole gorilla community. And they back this one particular gorilla. We're going to call him Jimmy the gorilla. Now, part of the problem here is there's nothing wrong with that.
That sounds like a character in a Guy Ritchie film.
Yeah, okay.
Take this bag and hand it to Jimmy the gorilla. No questions asked.
Okay, so the main problem here in ape society is that the community's growing too large. These small communist ideals that they live on are kind of only work within a small community. There is peace, but they've got no common enemy to bind them. Now the humans aren't an issue. And so they're obviously, eventually they're going to start settling into fighting against each other. You need something to distract the masses from the misery of their lives. So...
No.
Can't they just play football?
Yeah. Well, that's it. If you let them fight at the football every week, they'll get it out of the system. So... The gorillas, they're getting uppity. They're starting to talk about things like socialism, democracy. The chimpanzees are not particularly happy about this. So our plucky hero, Jimmy, the gorilla, they go on strike in the hope of leveraging better wages, more bananas. They ultimately succeed. The chimps have to relent, and this rises our hero's status. So this is the beginning of the film where we're sort of seeing, where he's coming from. Years pass by. Jimmy is now the head of the biggest gorilla union in the whole of Ape Land. He now starts getting aspirations of political power. He wants to stand for election
against Margaret Thatcher. Do you get it?
You've been working on that one for the last hour and a half.
Oh, I was thinking about it ever since you started your pitch. I was like, what can I?
Up against Abraham Lincoln.
No. Well, he just wants to stand for election to whatever the ape parliament is. Now, the ape parliament is dominated by chimps. There's a handful of orangutans.
Theresa May.
Oh, yes, brilliant.
That's not brilliant. No gorilla has ever attempted to be part of the political process before because they're too stupid. Everyone thinks they're simple. This battle for power, it's the main thrust of the film. This is our major sort of central storyline. Jimmy has to play the game a little bit in order to have any chance. He strikes a deal with some orangutans who they'll sort of secretly support his campaign. They'll whisper in the right ears, make sure things can happen. And they've got just enough power to stop the chimps having total control. The chimps, they threaten Jimmy, they threaten his family and all that sort of thing, usual sort of shenanigans, but he stands resilient. He's standing tall for the gorillas. And then, of course, there is infighting amongst the gorilla community as well. Now, they all appreciate the benefits that Jimmy has brought them over the years, but many of them do believe that they are an inferior species. The chimps have a more natural inclination towards leadership that makes them better politicians. They should be the ones making the decisions. And of course, there's the usual backbiting and things that go on in any power struggle. So one of his main advisors here could discover that he's been doing like under the table deals with the orangutans, and there's been bongs, and he's been siphoning off money for use as bribes and all that sort of stuff, which we see. Yeah, well, no, we see from Jimmy's point of view, he's just having to play the game enough to get involved. You got to get to the table before you can start making any changes. But they see this as a sort of a betrayal. And so all the legal arguments that the chimps are trying to put in for to stop him from running, they've been defeated. The chimps have to accept that he's allowed to stand, so they need to start moving to more nefarious means to stop him. So they get a female chimp to accuse Jimmy of rape. He's immediately arrested. He's thrown in jail. Now, he's soon released on bail, and the accusation, it casts a shadow on his reputation, even though... there's no truth to it. It can't really come to anything, and it's going to be all blow over, but they just do it at the right time that it just affects his reputation. And so he starts drinking. He's hits the skids a little bit. He gets arrested on a domestic dispute charge after he throws a chair through his front window in a fit of anger. The other gorillas decide he's become too much of a liability. They decide to throw him out, and at the last minute they replace him with another gorilla, but he's just a small-minded lackey. He's been opposing Jimmy all the way, but he hasn't got the charisma, he hasn't got the leadership skills that Jimmy has. So obviously, when they run for political office, there's no chance. He can't stand up in debate. He can't answer the questions well. He just fails to achieve anything. Jimmy, he falls out of public life, starts drinking more and more to numb the pain. And one day he doesn't come home. His wife reports him missing. About a week later, they find his body in a ditch. His neck is broken, but it can't be determined if the injuries were inflicted deliberately or was it a result of an accident, a drunken stumble. That's the end of the film. There are no statues to Jimmy the gorilla. There are no blue plaques commemorating the part he played in the early days of ape equality and the gorilla rights movement.
Harold McGibbon.
Okay, well, that's what you were thinking about.
Neanderthalville Chamberlain. Thus closes out our 2 Planet of the Apes episodes. Since recording this, I have seen War for the Planet of the Apes. I don't know about Calvin and Alan, but I really, 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 really liked it. It's fantastic. I'll save my full thoughts for our inevitable next Review of the Year episode, but in the meantime, it's kind of like that prison movie sequence that Alan and I both liked so much in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but for most of the film, I was expecting a war movie done with apes. I was not expecting a Prisoner of War movie done with apes. It's like Bridge on the River Kwai, but with apes. It's wonderful. Probably my favourite of the 3, and a solid contender for my favourite film of the year so far, in fact. So if you're on the fence about seeing it, despite the glowing reviews all round, not just from me, do make the effort. It's great. Oh, and come back next week. We've got a weird episode planned, really, quite an odd one, so yeah, you'll want to check back and see what that's all about. Have a good week, bye!